Yeah, lots of questions to be answered. For more now, we're joined by our correspondent, Barbara Vazel. She is on the ground in Manchester tonight, and by the sociologist Tahir Abbas from the Royal United Services Institute in London. He's an expert in Islamist radicalization. Good evening to both of you. Barbara, let me start with you. You are outside the town hall in Manchester. How are people coping with what happened last night?
They are coping incredibly well, really, because Mancunians are proud of the fact that they are a strong people. And that's what we heard today again and again. We will not show fear, we will not back down, and we will not be intimidated by this horrible act of terrorism, even though it struck children and teenagers. And of course, when people talk about that, you feel and you see their emotion. But if you then ask them, how will life go on? They are very strong in their opinion that they say they also will not be divided, because many different ethnic groups live together in Manchester, largely peacefully, of course. And so we saw and heard many messages of peace and togetherness today, later, particularly during the commemoration ceremony in the early evening here on the Manchester Town Square. So people really show a lot of strength.
And Barbara, police identified the suicide bombing suspect today, 22-year-old Salman Abedi. What do we know about him?
We know very little because the police doesn't give out information. They say that they are still investigating, that they are still chasing possible people in his background, or they haven't even said yet whether they suspect there really is a network. And so we know very little. He is supposed to be a British citizen of Libyan descent. This comes from US American sources. And also he's supposed to have come up from London by train to commit this horrific act last night. Obviously, the police could identify him on CCTV. But that's pretty much it. And the last address he was known for in Manchester has been raided, and that's it, really.
And Mr. Abbas, let me ask you, is it surprising that last night's attack targeted Manchester? I mean, what ties does the city have to extremist networks?
Well, there are no explicit ties to extremist networks in Manchester that bring it out as a special case here. We know that there are demographic concentrations of Muslim communities up and down the country. Manchester isn't one of the main ones, certainly.
And why the target, Mr. Abbas? Why a concert attended by children?
Well, it's a very sad situation. They've clearly decided that this would gain for them maximum impact and raise the kind of attention that they would be hoping for. And it's a very cruel, vindictive, very sordid act, and utterly deplorable.
We've had two major attacks in the UK in the past 2 months. Is this a coincidence, or do you see this as a sign of a growing jihadist threat?
Well, we have this concern around return foreign fighters, and there's always the worry that they may pose a particular threat if some of their violent tendencies can be reactivated. But we still don't know a great deal. We've seen in recent cases also in other parts of Western Europe where these young men have been called to radicalization and to carry out acts of violence within their own countries. And that's something that's been a distinctive pattern. And to use everyday instruments in this case, obviously this is a nail bomb, this is very different. But in other cases, we've had just cars and trucks used to kill innocent people.
And Barbara, let's just bring it back to Manchester. Some of the victims, we know they've been identified. Briefly, what can you tell us about them?
We know that the youngest victim that has been identified is sadly 8-year-old Susie Russo, and then 18-year-old girl Georgina Callender has also been identified. The police say that they are very slow with naming further victims because they want to talk to the family first, support them, and also I suspect that they still have some problems identifying victims, because we know that this was a bomb filled with shrapnel, more or less nuts and bolts, and so there were some horrific injuries.
All right. Barbara Vazel on the story for us tonight in Manchester, and Tahir Abbas in London. To both of you, thank you very much.